Good evening. It's Monday, the 4th of November. Our top stories. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris make their final pitches to voters ahead of Election Day. Music industry giant and 28-time Grammy Award winner Quincy Jones dies at the age of 91. Anger boils over in flood-hit Valencia as the weather agency issues an alert for more heavy rainfall. And at least 10 killed after a volcano erupts in eastern Indonesia. You're watching The World. Hello, I'm Girish Sawlani. A little later, we'll cross to Thailand to look at what's behind new restrictions on pet ownership in Bangkok. Well, the prolific music producer and 28-time Grammy Award winner Quincy Jones has died at the age of 91. His publicist has announced he died on Sunday night in Los Angeles, surrounded by family. Quincy Jones's work spanned genres and generations, collaborating with artists from Frank Sinatra to Michael Jackson, with whom he produced the best-selling album of all time, Thriller. He is survived by 7 children, including actress Rashida Jones. And for more on Quincy Jones, we'll hear shortly from music journalist Glenn Baker, who met face-to-face with the music industry giant. Well, the US is now counting down the hours before polls open in the presidential election, and candidates are making their final pitches to voters in swing states that could deliver them to the White House. Speaking in Pennsylvania, Donald Trump has ramped up his claims without proving any evidence that the election is already being stolen.
They are fighting so hard to steal this damn thing. Look at what's going on. Look at what's going on in your state. Every day, they're talking about extending hours and stuff. Who ever heard of this stuff? We should have one-day voting and paper ballots.
Harris was attending events in Michigan, a state that has mostly voted blue for the last 30 years, except for 2016 when Mr. Trump won by a small margin. But the Democrats are concerned that disillusionment over the war in Gaza from the state's large population of Arab Americans could hurt voter turnout. At a rally in East Lansing, the vice president repeated one of the catch cries of her campaign.
Privilege of those who can afford it. And to those certain individuals who still want to get rid of the Affordable Care Act and take us back to the days when insurance companies could deny people with pre-existing conditions, well, you all know what we say. We are not going back.
And with less than 2 days out from the election, a well-respected poll in the traditionally Republican state of Iowa had a surprise result for Kamala Harris, finding she's pulled out 3 points ahead of Donald Trump, who was leading the state by 4 points in September. It's thought older female voters are driving a late shift towards the vice president.
And people who want to say, well, that's within the margin of error because he could be higher and she could be lower. And I say, okay, fine, but margins of error work both ways. So if you want to say it could be tied, you need to say it is also equally likely the margin is even wider than we're showing. So I just say the best estimate, 47-44.
At least 24 people have been killed after a bus veered off the road and plunged into a deep gorge in northern India. The accident occurred in the mountainous state of Uttarakhand. A state government official says more than 40 people were on board the bus. Teams of workers have been deployed to the site, and authorities are warning the death toll may rise. Meantime, at least 10 people have died after a volcanic eruption in the east of Indonesia. Our correspondent Bill Birtles reports.
An utterly terrifying experience for villagers living near Mount Lewatobi because this eruption happened at 1 in the morning when they were asleep, and it was so powerful that it propelled rocks as far as 4 kilometres away from the crater. Of the deaths confirmed so far, 6 of them happened when a building was completely engulfed in lava. Now, authorities have evacuated thousands of people. They've created a 7-kilometre buffer zone around the crater because they fear there could be further eruptions. They say the ash cloud was up to 2 kilometres high. Now, this is a very active volcano. It last erupted in July, but this was a stronger than usual eruption. And Indonesia, a country that has many active volcanoes and many eruptions, it is rare that they result in deaths. At first light this morning, we saw images of entire villages covered in ash. For that reason, the search and rescue effort will continue throughout the day. Authorities are worried that the death toll could rise further.
At least 31 people have been killed in Gaza, according to Palestinian medics, as Israeli strikes continue in the region. In Khan Yunis in southern Gaza, a single strike left 8 Palestinians dead, including 4 children. Another 13 people were killed in the north, where Israel's military says it wants to prevent a regrouping of the militant group Hamas. Gazan health authorities say the military offensive over the weekend interrupted efforts to vaccinate thousands of children against polio, claiming a clinic was struck by an Israeli drone. Israel's military, though, has denied the claim. Well, angry protesters in flood-ravaged parts of Spain have vented their anger at the country's king and queen, pelting them with mud during their visit. More than 200 people have died in the flooding, the worst toll in decades, as fury boils over the government's response to the disaster.
Chants of murderer, murderer greet this official tour of devastated Paya Porta.
Don't protect him, they are killing us.
More than 60 people died here, making it one of the hardest hit districts of Valencia. Spain's Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, is quickly escorted to safety. King Felipe and Queen Letizia, surrounded by guards, continue into the fray to try and console the weary and hear their grievances firsthand.
It was known, and nobody did anything to avoid it.
Please, the dead are still in the garages. The families are looking for their relatives and friends. Please come. We only ask for help.
The Queen moved to tears. These men try to assure her this anger is not aimed at you. It's not just the royal family facing backlash. The fury is being felt by the Spanish government. Residents say they received insufficient warning prior to the flood and a slow response in the aftermath.
We are not going to deviate, despite what may happen with some absolutely marginal, violent people.
We have to give them hope, attend to the emergency, but also give them hope.
For many, little hope remains. Firefighters and divers here work to drain a flooded underground car park. More than a dozen people are feared dead inside. In the evening, away from royalty and the heads of government, people express their anger with a traditional cacerolazo, a demonstration of banging pots and pans, trying to hit them hard enough to be heard in Madrid. Matthew Lane, ABC News.
And for more, I'm joined from Valencia by freelance journalist Melita Cameron Wood. Melita, really good to have you on the program. Of course, it's not often you see monarchs of a nation and the Prime Minister being treated, with that sort of reaction. Can you explain that anger? Was it primarily that the affected residents were not given enough warning of the floods and the rains?
There are a number of factors at play. It has been revealed since that a number of the people who actually threw projectiles and mud at the officials were members of far-right groups who attended the protests with the aim of throwing things and causing disruption and causing violence. It has been a great deal of distrust in the authorities because many say that this crisis is not being treated as a purely humanitarian crisis, but as a political one. And the issue is that the local government here in Valencia is actually run by a coalition between the conservative Partido Popular and the far-right Vox. and the central government in Madrid is run by a socialist party. So there is a conflict in terms of left and right, and many people are saying that perhaps this delayed response was political in the sense that either the local government wanted to show that they were able to solve things by themselves without help, or that help was, in some cases, refused. Even there have been reports of help being offered from the French firemen, for example. 200 firemen were offered, and this help was refused. Some French firemen actually arrived on site of their own accord. And there have been videos going viral online of some French firemen arriving in the town of Alfafar, and they were actually the first emergency services to arrive in that street that they were pictured in. So this has caused uproar. Many people feel abandoned and wonder where the emergency services have been, where the government has been. So a lot of this anger was directed at the president of the local government, the Generalitat Valenciana, Carlos Masson, who was next to the king and queen during this visit. So many people say that this anger was primarily directed at Carlos Masson. There are protests scheduled for the 9th of November, where people will be asking him to stand down because of the reaction and the way that this has been dealt with.
Yes, I'm curious as to the point you made earlier that, perhaps this may have been something that far-right groups were trying to exploit. Can you tell us more about this and which are some of these far-right groups that you're talking about?
These are a number of far-right groups that organised their attendance at these protests via WhatsApp groups. They have also organised protests at earlier stages at other political events. So this is not a new phenomenon, but this is still, it's still emerging. So I would need to check the exact names of these groups.
Okay, let's look at the situation as it stands in Valencia. We know that the death toll was rising. Are there fears that it would rise even further?
Yes. There is, for example, a car park, a subterranean car park that was completely submerged. It was part of a shopping mall. And there are fears that this has turned into a mass grave. The car park itself has been entered by professional divers who are looking for corpses because it would take so long to actually pump all of the water out. They're trying to go in and accelerate the process in this way. But there are major fears that, the death toll is going to rise significantly.
Yeah, and we are looking at live pictures of that scenario there, that car park that you were talking about, and you can see a number of authorities there who are still working to hopefully find any survivors. On the situation, where is the recovery effort at, and what are the immediate needs at the moment?
Many people are still without basic food and water. They're relying on friends to bring them supplies. There have been websites set up to try and so that people can actually say, I need help here, and then volunteers can go directly to their houses. So people are really trying to take it into their own hands because there is distrust in the authorities. This has caused a bit of conflict as the authorities have said that they would like roads to be kept clear, and there have been some complaints that the number of volunteers have been impeding this access to emergency services. But many people simply do not trust that this help is going to get to people quick enough. So there is a great deal of conflict surrounding this cleanup and recovery process. But I mean, the damage is clear to see. People have lost their livelihoods. And I mean, even currently, we've got 6 roads that have collapsed. So we've currently got 30 kilometers of traffic jams entering Valencia. So we're really feeling the impact on several levels, and it's impacting businesses as well, because people aren't able to take the train as well between Madrid and Valencia, for example. So commuters are also suffering, but obviously those suffering most are those on the ground who have lost everything.
Okay, Melita Cameron Wood, really good to get your reporting there from Valencia. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Three Chinese astronauts have returned to Earth after a 6-month stay on the Tiangong space station. The astronauts touched down in the Inner Mongolia region. During their stay, they conducted China's longest spacewalk while installing shielding against space debris.
Could you identify from...
Pakistan's second-largest city of Lahore has achieved a grim record at the weekend when it had the worst air pollution it's ever recorded. People have been urged to stay indoors as the annual pollution season makes Pakistan's air some of the most hazardous in the world.
As the smog built up in the Pakistani city of Lahore, residents felt the familiar signs of toxic air, burning eyes and difficulty breathing. Lahore recorded an air quality index of above 1900 on Saturday. 300 and above is considered hazardous to human health. Air pollution has been worsening over the past few weeks, forcing officials to close schools for at least a week and declare masks mandatory.
Smog is making our children and adults sick. We're wearing masks to shield ourselves from sore throats, coughing and other health issues. Due to this smog situation, many contractors and the owners stopped working. They don't leave their homes until noon to 1 p.m. Secondly, our productivity level has decreased as well due to smog causing fever, breathing difficulties, coughing and eye infections.
It's a problem seen every year as smoke from crop burning and industrial pollution, mixed with colder temperatures, makes air quality plummet. Officials say pollution blown over the border from India is worsening the situation.
There was an eastern wind corridor through which the air from India, starting from Delhi to Chandigarh and to Haryana and all other cities of India, the polluted air added more pollution to the Lahore air.
Some are frustrated that the government is dragging its feet on a public health emergency.
It is beyond my understanding that each year Lahore became the most polluted city in the world, and the government is sleeping. I think the government, should take safety precautions at least 3 or 5 months in advance.
Lahore was once known as the City of Gardens, but rapid urbanisation and a surging population have reduced green spaces. A green lockdown in the city, which will ban certain polluting activities in some areas, will try to address that problem.
We are going to plant 100,000 trees in that area to fight back to the smoke.
There are already restrictions on motorcycles and brick kilns. And office employees are being encouraged to work from home and reduce vehicle emissions. But with smog worsening each year, those measures may be too little, too late. Amelia Costigan, ABC News.
Moldova's pro-Western President Maia Sandu has won a second term in a pivotal presidential runoff against a Russia-friendly opponent. Sandu declared victory after securing 54% of the total votes, with nearly 98% counted. The race, though, was overshadowed by claims of Russian interference, voter fraud and intimidation. The result will be a major relief for the government, which strongly backed her candidacy and her push for closer Western ties on Moldova's path towards the European Union. And let's return to the breaking news this evening that the titan of the music industry, Quincy Jones, has died aged 91. Music journalist Glenn A. Baker met Quincy Jones during a trip to Australia. He describes him as a gifted musician who was remarkably humble, even at the height of his fame.
Quincy Jones, like George Martin, was the sort of producer that everybody who was anybody in music, be they Frank Sinatra, and going to Michael Jackson. They all wanted to, in fact, to move in his orbit. He was remarkably gifted. I think he was nominated for 80 Grammy Awards and he won 28 of them. But what is most interesting to most people, I suppose, is that he produced the biggest selling album of all time, which is over 50 million sales. And that is Thriller by Michael Jackson. In fact, he did 3 albums. He did Off the Wall, Thriller, and Bad. And people would say that although Michael Jackson was plainly also incredibly talented, that Quincy gave him a focus. He gave him a dimension. He made it possible for him to actually bring out his genius. Well, he was calm and he was gentle and he was soothing. I remember when I met him, it was in fact at an ARIA Awards. We came out for I think Sony bought him out for that. And basically, he was such a gorgeous man to speak to. He was unrushed, he was unhurried, and that's of course why Ray Charles found it so easy to work with him, because sort of like, and he produced so many early hits for Ray Charles as well. But I mean, there was something about him. He just made everybody around him feel incredibly comfortable. Oddly enough, just when I talked to Ray Charles about Quincy Jones, I talked to Quincy Jones about Ray Charles. And I mean, particularly, but I asked him, was it true that when Ray got off the bus, in Seattle, that Quincy was there to greet him and take him to a club, and they were just teenagers at the time. And he just laughed and he smiled. He said, "Yeah," he said, "it was very, very fortuitous, but there was nothing boastful about him. I mean, his credits were phenomenal by any stretch of the imagination, but he didn't boast about any of them. He was just happy to have done it all."
Authorities in Bangkok are introducing new rules to regulate pet ownership in the Thai capital. Under the new measures, the number of pets allowed will depend on the size of the home, and owners may be fined for dogs that bark loudly or bite. Our Southeast Asia correspondent Lauren Day joins me with the details. Lauren, before we get to the how and the why, can you tell us more about these new rules? How will they work?
Well, Girish, basically the Bangkok City Council plans to mandate registration and microchipping of pets here in Bangkok, and will also introduce these restrictions on how many pets you can own based on how big your home is. So basically, if you live in a tiny apartment like 20 to 80 square metres, you can own up to 2 cats or dogs. If you're in a bigger place, say 200 to 400 square metres, you can own up to 4. So for context, I'm in a pretty average 2-bedroom place. I could have up to 3 cats and dogs if my landlord allowed. Unfortunately, they won't. But the other thing that they're introducing is restrictions around certain breeds of dogs that have been deemed dangerous. Those are things like Pit Bull Terriers, Staffordshire Terriers and Rottweilers. And so for those dogs, people will need a special registration, and they'll also need to muzzle the dogs in public and have them on special strong and very short leashes to keep them under control. And as you said, there can be fines for breaching these and even jail time. So they're taking this very seriously.
Yeah, so these are pretty strict regulations that are coming to be enforced. Lauren, what's triggered these new rules?
Well, at the moment, Girish, it's pretty lax here in Bangkok. Pet ownership is huge, it's very widespread, but there aren't that many regulations. You can have as many pets as you want, you don't have to register them, you don't have to microchip them. And what that's meant is that you see a lot of stray cats and dogs around the city not being fed, being neglected, sometimes being hit by cars or biting people. And there's a big fear as well about the spread of diseases. Apparently, 1 in 10 dogs in Bangkok has rabies, which is surprising and quite alarming, to be frank. But there's also been a number of high-profile fatal dog attacks around Thailand from those breeds that I mentioned, Pit Bulls and Rottweilers, that have really galvanised people around this issue. So there's been a lot of pressure on authorities to finally do something and get the pet control issue under control.
And has there been any reaction to these rules, particularly from existing owners and even animal rights groups?
Yeah, well, I think broadly people support some kind of control around pet ownership here. Everyone recognises that this is a problem here in Bangkok, right across Thailand really, but this has long been a problem. Street dogs and street cats causing a lot of issues. But the problem really is around implementation. So I spoke to one of the main groups, the Soy Dog Foundation, that does things like sterilisation and vaccination and dog rescues, and they say one issue is that many people already have more pets than they would be allowed under these rules. So what will happen with them? Will they just dump their animals on the streets and cause more problems? The other issue is microchipping costs money. So will that end up being prohibitively expensive for some people and they'll be scared of the fines, so they'll just abandon their pets and cause more work for organisations like this? So I don't know how well thought through it is. And the final issue is really policing. Whether or not authorities will go around door to door and check how many dogs and cats are there, or whether or not they're microchipped, seems highly unlikely. And I was speaking to one of my colleagues in my office today who is a pet owner herself, and she said, you look around and, theoretically, you're supposed to wear helmets on motorbikes in Bangkok, and, few people do, and it's just not really enforced. So people have a lot of scepticism, rightly so, about whether or not this will be implemented and whether it will actually make a difference to what is a really big issue here.
Yeah, Lauren, I'm pretty sure I've seen dogs on bikes in Bangkok. But has pet ownership been growing in Thailand, especially in the big cities like Bangkok where you are?
Absolutely. Thais absolutely love their pets, and much like in Australia and right across the world, they've really humanised their pets. They're no longer just guard dogs or cats that catch mice. They're really part of the family. There is about 70% of Thais own at least one pet, and there's something like 8.5 million dogs and 4 million cats, and that has been growing at a rate of about 10% per year. There was a big spike, obviously, during the pandemic, like we saw in the West. That happened here in Thailand too, and with that growth in pet ownership, obviously the problems that I discussed are also growing. So there's a big impetus for authorities to actually finally get in control of this issue.
Okay, let's see what happens in the weeks and months to come. Lauren Day in Bangkok, thanks very much.
Thanks, Girish.
Lending restrictions could be eased to allow first home buyers to borrow more and break into the market. That's what a federal inquiry is probing, and some of the big banks are expressing support. But the banking regulator says the rules are in place for a reason.
Okay, sounds good. Well, that's
for first-home buyers like Cassie McLaren, breaking into the property market is getting harder.
The lending criteria right now is extremely stringent. I feel like there are so many things that we can't possibly meet.
Lenders must apply a serviceability buffer to mortgages. Currently, that's 3%, meaning the lender has to test a person's ability to repay the loan at 3% above the variable rate they're being offered. But the politician heading a Senate inquiry into home ownership says it's time to lower that buffer.
Well, the Australian dream is falling out of reach for millennials and for Gen Zs. One of the reasons is that the lending laws are very rigid and blunt.
Some of Australia's big banks, including ANZ and National Australia Bank, as well as the big bank lobby group, also want changes.
Current obligations for assessing a first home buyer's serviceability don't account for their stronger income growth potential compared to other borrowers.
Reducing the buffer will boost the profits of banks and their lending, while piling up risk and hazard for some of the most vulnerable people looking for buying a house in the Australian community.
The nation's banking regulator, APRA, also wants the buffer to stay where it is. It told the Senate inquiry that Australian households already hold a lot of debt compared to what they earn, and the buffer is there to protect financial stability.
Go get it.
Cassie's parents are helping her with a deposit to get on the property ladder, but other first home buyers might not be so fortunate. Nassim Khadem, ABC News.
One of cinema's most infamous monsters has just celebrated its 70th birthday. Godzilla first hit the movie screens in 1954 in Japan, which saw the reptilian giant plow through post-war streets of Tokyo. The nuclear-charged reptile has been thought to represent the horrors of nuclear warfare and a way of processing the trauma from the Nagasaki and Hiroshima bombings. He's one of Hollywood's hardest workers. From Tokyo tourism ambassador an Oscar winner and Hollywood star owner, and being the face of the longest-running film franchise in history, with, can you believe it, 37 sequels. You are watching The World, the top stories we are following tonight. Music industry giant and 28-time Grammy Award winner Quincy Jones dies at the age of 91. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris make their final pitches to voters in swing states ahead of polls opening in the US election. And Spanish royals heckled during a visit to Valencia after last week's flash floods killed more than 200 people. And returning to the US election, and as Donald Trump digs up all grievances, authorities are making preparations for any attempt from the former president to seize power. Here's Global Affairs editor John Lyons.
As we get closer to the finish line, Donald Trump is escalating his rhetoric, claiming widespread cheating in the election process. There's no evidence for this, but the tactic is no surprise, given he never accepted the results in 2020. So, Donald Trump may well cry foul on election night and not accept the results again. The key difference this time, he's not president and doesn't have the same power levers available to him. However, authorities are taking no chances. They're fortifying institutions and protecting election officials, and will do everything in their power to prevent a repeat of January 6.
Tornadoes and severe storms have swept through the U.S. state of Oklahoma, causing significant damage to structures and homes. At least 6 people have been injured and power lines and trees toppled. More than 80,000 homes and businesses have been left without power. Local authorities have warned residents to remain alert with heavy rain and potential flooding forecast. UK detectives have asked prosecutors to consider charging an actor and comedian Russell Brand over historic sexual abuse allegations. The alleged abuse, which Brand denies, occurred between 2006 and 2013 when he was a radio and TV presenter. 4 women have accused the disgraced actor of offences including rape, sexual assault and emotional abuse. Police say they've passed a file of evidence to the Crown Prosecution Service, urging them to take action. Returning to Moldova, where pro-EU president has claimed a second term in a runoff election against a pro-Russian rival, Alexander Stoyanoglu. Maia Sandu's victory follows allegations of Russian interference and comes shortly after the country backed a referendum in favor of joining the EU. Global Affairs analyst Michael Bosecki was in Moldova just a few hours ago, and he joins me now. Michael, good to have you on the program this evening. Now, there were allegations, as I mentioned earlier, of Russian meddling in this election. What's the basis of this accusation? What's Russia been accused of doing?
Sure, good to be with you. Well, it was on a number of levels. We visited a major polling station yesterday, and everything was calm, well-organized, professional, although voter turnout did seem a little bit on the low side. But further away in the countryside, where there's greater economic disparities, also in overseas voting posts, in Europe, for example, there seemed to have been quite a bit of manipulation, intimidation, that sort of thing. There were reports, for example, of bomb scares in numerous locations overseas. There were also allegations of Russia organizing Moldovans to travel to neighboring countries and to vote there as well. The other kind of background story to this, what the Russians have done to constrain the pipeline of overseas voters in Russia, where there are a lot of Moldovans, is to only have a very small number of polling stations. And like Ukraine, Moldovan embassies abroad are not well resourced, so it's very difficult for them to process high numbers of voters. And then finally, within Moldova itself, a lot of money was allegedly spent to buy votes, again, taking advantage of that vulnerability of economically depressed people, but also of moving voters, for example, from Russian-controlled Transnistria, the strip within Moldova, into Moldova proper to vote as well. So on a number of levels, the Russian machine was very, very active.
Yeah, so does that explain why and how Alexander Stoyanoglu won the majority of votes within Moldova's borders?
Well, I think what you're seeing is the bigger picture happening in Moldova, where there is polarization going on. And believe me, this is a dry run for 2025 when we're going to have parliamentary elections in Moldova. I think it'll be very close. But also, I think it's, the governing party, as with President Poroshenko, who was before Mr. Zelensky, not really addressing economic disparities. I mean, Chisinau looks not too bad. I go there a lot, but when you go to the countryside, you see how people are struggling. Salaries are very, very low. Moldova does not have a lot of resources to address these things. The EU leaders love to give a lot of pats on the back and rhetoric, but I think they also, if they want to avoid trouble next year in parliamentary elections, they have to get more resources to the government to stamp out corruption and to help elevate the economic state of ordinary people there.
And how do you think this might sort of flow on towards Moldova's, I suppose, application to join the European Union? Will it be as smooth as some think it would be?
Well, it's a long path, and just come here and ask the Ukrainians when they'll become part of EU. They don't know, because there's a lot to be done, especially during wartime and instability, to, for example, stamp out corruption, to clean up the judiciary, that sort of thing. And, I don't blame folks in this part of the world for being somewhat cynical, because what's happening right now geopolitically and what could about to happen in the US elections could be a big, big tidal wave for the way we live, for the stability that we're used to. So I think it's not even clear, for example, whether NATO will be around in 2 or 3 years if Trump gets in. And as far as the EU goes, Girish, is that when you have people like Mr. Orban in Hungary just taking advantage of vulnerabilities and trying to get bribes from the EU in order to vote a certain way, you can't blame people here for being a bit cynical when it comes to EU membership and what it might look like in the future.
And of course, where you are in Ukraine, the president there, Volodymyr Zelensky, did welcome the result. I think the reasons are pretty obvious, I suppose, in the context of the war with Russia.
Yeah, it's Ukrainian eyes were definitely trained on Moldova this weekend, and a big reason for that is that strip of Russian-controlled territory in Transnistria. There were some theories that if the vote went to the opposition, Ukraine could try and secure its borders further by making a move on Transnistria like it did on Kursk. Of course, that never happened. But it does, I mean, the vote, let's be honest, with the EU vote and with this vote, they were very, very close. And I think it shows the huge Russian machine at work, the manipulation. And, when it comes to the EU and other bodies that fight Russian disinformation manipulation, they are way, way behind in terms of what the Russians have put into it, resource-wise and also time-wise. So I think this should also be a wake-up call, what happened in Moldova, what happened in Georgia, in terms of the growing influence the Russians have through media and also non-traditional channels.
Yes, and how much was the Russian machine at work in Georgia? I mean, the results coming out that the pro-Moscow ruling party has won the elections there, but the global market research and data firm Harris X says that result is statistically impossible. So what's going on there?
Well, yeah, it is hard to believe. And when you consider the number of Moldovans out on the streets, I believe there's going to be another big protest tonight. But about a week ago, and in the run-up to the parliamentary elections there, you've got to wonder what's going on. And, very respected media institutions and observation bodies did see a lot of voter fraud, a lot of intimidation. And I've got to say, I was a bit surprised at the statements of the international observer missions, including the OSCE, of which I used to work for. They seemed quite muted and out of sync in terms of what foreign journalists saw, in terms of what opposition leaders were claiming as well. So that makes you wonder what's going on there as well.
Okay, Michael Bosaki, really good to get your analysis as always. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
5 people have died after an inflatable boat carrying a group of migrants sank on the way to the Canary Islands. 2 inflatable boats were spotted by the Spanish Sea Rescue on Sunday, and 97 people were rescued. But 5 bodies were found after one of the vessels deflated. Spanish emergency services rescued more than 1,500 people over the weekend, with the influx of migrants from Africa's Sahel region attributed to calm seas on the popular Atlantic route. As Australia grapples with how to regulate social media, thousands of parents in the US are taking up the fight to hold these hugely profitable tech giants accountable. For the last 4 Corners episode of 2024, reporter Louise Milligan spoke to whistleblowers, lawyers, and a family devastated by the loss of their 18-year-old daughter.
If you were to choose 3 words that sum up social media, what would they be?
Unnecessarily, tragically harmful.
After 20 years of unfettered growth, a realisation is dawning about the true cost of social media.
I don't think Instagram wants to kill kids. I think Instagram wants to make a ton of money, and they don't care if they happen to kill some kids along the way.
This social experiment has had the most profound consequences for young people.
We let a stranger into our house every night that does the most horrific things and can manipulate a child's mind.
This is an urgent crisis. Millions of teens are having their mental health compromised. I think Mark is responsible for what happened to these kids.
Would you like to apologize for what you've done to these good people?
Fix it. Your algorithms are targeting the mentally unwell and children.
Those algorithms are also spreading disinformation. On the eve of an American election, democracy is under threat. Insiders are sounding the alarm.
It's a feeling like you are in a car hurtling toward a brick wall or some danger that you know is coming.
Online anger is spilling onto the streets.
These were our first social media riots.
Returning to the US election, and the economy is front of mind for many Americans. Mortgage costs and the grocery bills are through the roof. And in the swing state of Wisconsin, the high cost of living is pushing some voters towards Donald Trump. Adam Harvey filed this report from Milwaukee.
So homes like this right here, homes like this right here are in the 300s.
Menominee Falls, Greater Milwaukee, where if you want an insight into property and politics, you better call Chris Slinker.
Is it like most cities in America where they're blue and the rural regions are red?
We are most definitely a hyper-segregated area when it comes to politics.
In Milwaukee, everything is more expensive than it was 4 years ago, especially houses.
So I sold this house a few years ago, and this is a subdivision which homes like this were selling about 4 years ago, right in the low 600s. And this is one example of that type of house.
And what's it worth now?
Probably in the 8s. 800, 850.
Now I'm digging my heels.
As well as being a top real estate agent, he's the vice chair of the local branch of the Republican Party.
Policies of the current administration have put a huge strain on the economy, not just in the housing market, but in multiple markets. And I think housing is just one big example because in many cases, at least in the United States, our home is one of our biggest investments.
The drivers of inflation include the money that was pumped into the economy after COVID, the war in Ukraine. They're kind of global issues. How can you blame one side or the other for what's happened here in America?
Well, maybe a global issue, but here locally, at least in the United States, as a nation, both sides handle the economy in much different ways. And I think that Donald Trump and the Trump administration had a much better handle on appropriately spending money in the economy than the left does.
Wisconsin could fall either way on November 5, but this area, about 30 minutes drive from downtown Milwaukee, is Republican territory, with some Democratic outposts.
You know, these homes are still probably in the 400. That one's worth less because of that ugly sign.
Gary, here we are, we're in a Republican area, but you've got the Harris Walls signs on your lawn. Why?
Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are the future of our country. When you compare the alternative, Donald Trump, who's been there in 2016, has proved himself to be completely incompetent and a disgrace to the presidency. This is a high-stakes election. I mean, prices may be up, but that happens up and down, it fluctuates. Things like that will fluctuate over time. So as far as the main issue goes, that's not really a lot to me.
Again and again, polls say the economy is the issue for Americans. Donald Trump taps into that with his mantra, "Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?" Rachel Maciejewski is reminded of that every time she goes shopping for her family of 6.
Have you noticed prices changing?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I can't go to the grocery store without spending less than $250 usually.
It's an expensive exercise.
Well, and $250 is very basic. I mean, when I go grocery shopping and I need a little bit more like toothpaste and other things, I'm easily spending $350, $400 in a shopping trip.
And what did you use to spend?
If I budgeted appropriately, I could get away with between $150 and $200.
Rachel's a nurse. Her husband, Scott, is a police officer. They earn above the median wage and have a small mortgage, but they're not getting ahead. In fact, they're cutting back.
I mean, it has been a conversation that we've had with the kiddos. And I know my youngest daughter, we actually dropped gymnastics this year because of the price that we were paying. We are busting at the seams. They don't have a lot of space to hang out or have friends over. They all share bedrooms, so there isn't private space for them to hang out.
If you could afford it, would you move somewhere else?
It's just nothing that we have been able to afford. And now with interest rates and the cost of homes going up, it's just not even an option for us.
The economy in Wisconsin is strong, but life is more expensive than it used to be. House prices went up 8% over the past year. Inflation peaked at 9.1% in 2022, the highest rate in decades, but is now back down to 2.1%. Across the nation, grocery prices have risen about 20% since Donald Trump was president.
Do you think life would have been less expensive under Donald Trump?
I do. We were living much richer lives when he was in office.
Only in America, making America great again. Trump 2024.
I'm really concerned about world peace, and I think Trump has the energy and just the vision to pull the world together again.
I mean, we've seen such a decline in our nation since the Biden-Harris administration, and it's causing such tragedies to families right now.
Donald Trump won Wisconsin in 2016. Joe Biden took it back in 2020. And nothing highlights the importance of this state and the closeness of the race like the fact that in the last gasp of the campaign, tonight, both candidates are here. Donald Trump downtown, Kamala Harris a few kilometres away from this Red Sea in the city's suburbs.
The sea parts around a small but formidable blue reef.
Trump is unfit. I don't know if it's going to help any, but it's worth a try. I can't just sit home and not do anything.
As a foreign observer, I can't understand why it's so close. Can you?
No. I go to bed at night and praying. That's what I go to bed doing. I just can't believe it. I'm praying that the women go in and vote for Kamala, even though their husbands think they're voting for someone else. I could be wrong, but that's my hope.
Also here, Rachel Maciejewski.
Yeah, Trump!
What did you think of the rally last night?
Oh my gosh, it was fun. It was fun. It was great to be amongst like-minded people.
You're a Christian woman. Some of Donald Trump's behaviour has been, let's say, a little, I would imagine, a little troubling to someone of faith. Some of the intemperate language, the aggressiveness. How do you marry that behaviour with your faith?
Sure. You know, nobody is perfect. God is the only perfect being. We all make mistakes. I think the mean tweets, I think they're unintentional at times, jovial at times. I feel like we could compare continuously in Kamala versus Donald Trump. We teach our kids not to lie, and unfortunately I think Kamala is continuously lying.
At the other side of town, the battle for Milwaukee's Racine County is so tight, the pins could fall either way.
So tell me about life in Racine County. What's it like? Are you winning? Is it fun?
To me, it's just average. Go to work, come home. I have a wife and a daughter, spend time with them, go out one night a week with my coworkers to bowl and stuff like that, and that's about it.
Friday night bowling is sacrosanct for Paul Hummer and his buddies.
Is it expensive living in Racine County?
It's gone up definitely the last couple of years. Since COVID, everything's kind of exploded a little bit, but from what I read and see, it's probably still about average.
So you're allowed to tell me how you voted?
I voted for Kamala. I just don't like the divisiveness that the Trump side has provided, in my opinion.
What are the issues that are important to you this election?
Big one is on the women's stuff, the freedoms that seem to be taken away out of their hands and put into the government's hands. I don't necessarily like that stuff. Not that I'm like pro-abortion, but I believe it's up to the woman and the situation she's in.
Paul has a wildly optimistic hope that the American discord ends on election day.
30, 40 years ago when I was like, 20 years old, people had difference in politics and we disagreed, but we still were all friends and got along, and we didn't believe one side was trying to destroy the other. And I would like the country to get back to that. Whether it happens, I don't know.
Australia has beaten Pakistan by 2 wickets after Mitchell Starc led an impressive bowling display in the first one-day international at the MCG. Starc struck early, removing both Pakistani openers as he finished with 3 for 33 from his 10 overs. Pat Cummins and Adam Zampa each claimed 2 wickets. Tail-ender Naseem Shah added some respectability to the tourists' total, scoring 40 from 39 balls before he was the last wicket to fall. In reply, Australia made a shaky start, falling to 2 for 28 before a solid partnership between Steve Smith and Josh Inglis put the hosts back in control, with Australia reaching 204 runs with 99 balls remaining. The teams will play 3 50-over games before moving to a T20 series. Well, the Sydney Marathon has been added to the list of World Marathon Major Series, joining the likes of Boston, Berlin, London and Tokyo. The government and marathon organisers have been lobbying for years to get the race added as a major, and says it will bring in tens of millions of dollars into the economy.
Then just over here.
It's official.
The 7th marathon major right here in Sydney, the best city in the world. Of course, we should be ranked with those other international cities.
From next year, Sydney's marathon will be in an elite club made up of Boston, Chicago, London, Berlin, Tokyo and New York, which hosted the most recent World Marathon last night. Recognition for this beautiful marathon course, the most beautiful marathon course in the world, and it'll be beamed around the world. Organisers had to tick off 104 separate criteria in a 3-year bidding process to win over the World Marathon organisers. The Premier says the event will be a great ad for Sydney, but he won't say how much it will cost.
Look, a lot, much of it is in kind, street closures, the support of New South Wales government agencies.
The New South Wales government estimates the Sydney Marathon will bring in around $73 million to the state's economy over 3 years. This year, 25,000 people ran the marathon, but as of next year, when it's on the world circuit, they're expecting 33,000 people, including some of the world's best. Possibly including the former world record holder, Kenya's Eliud Kipchoge.
I reckon he would come to Sydney and love it, and that'd be so cool for him to experience Australia through the Sydney Marathon.
Alongside some of Australia's best, like Paris Olympian Andy Buchanan.
It's definitely really high on my agenda list, and it's like the Olympics, World Champs, and then Sydney Marathon.
While local runners are keen to complete the set of world marathons.
Has anyone got the 6 from the oven?
Personally, just to look and do that 7th, star eventually is just amazing.
The race is on as Sydney joins an exclusive club. David Mark, ABC News.
And let's recap our top stories before we go. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris make their final pitches to voters in swing states as officials beef up security ahead of Tuesday's vote. Music industry giant and 28-time Grammy Award winner Quincy Jones dies at the age of 91. And Spanish royals are met with mud by angry Spaniards during a visit to Valencia after last week's flash floods killed more than 200 people. And that is your World for tonight. You can always watch the show on iView, and the world news and our interviews can be found at the ABC's YouTube channel. I'm Girish Sawlani. Keep healthy, keep smiling, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.